He thought someone had broken in. But when he ran into that kitchen, what he saw dropped him to his knees. The lights were off. It was barely 7 a.m. Andrew James had just returned from a last-minute business trip, tie still on, briefcase still in hand. He wasn't supposed to be home, but something felt off the moment he stepped through the door. There was a sound, soft, strange, laughter. And not just any laughter. It was high and wild, echoing down the marble hallway, alive and real, in a house that hadn't felt alive in months. His heart jumped. That house had been quiet since the divorce. Too quiet. His son, Alex, 5 years old, hadn't spoken in weeks. Some days he wouldn't even come out of his room. And now there was laughter? Andrew dropped everything and ran. He turned the corner into the kitchen, ready to find a stranger, an intruder, something dangerous. Instead, he found flour. Everywhere. Floating in the air like snow. Spilled across the hardwood floor. Piled in soft drifts beneath the sink. And in the center of it all, Alex, lying flat on his back, smiling, arms wide, making snow angels in the flour, laughing. Next to him was Elizabeth, the new housekeeper, barefoot, hands dusted white, a quiet smile on her face. She didn't look afraid. She didn't move. She just watched the boy, like the moment was too sacred to disturb. Andrew couldn't speak. He couldn't move. His son was laughing. Not just giggling, but laughing from the gut. Freely. Fully. And then, Alex sat up, looked at his father, and said a single word. Again. One word. After weeks of silence. After months of grief. After everything they had lost. And something broke open inside Andrew. Not in fear, but in awe. He didn't understand what was happening, but he knew it was holy. He had walked into a storm and found a miracle. Before we begin this story, take a second to like this video, subscribe, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. I pray this story reminds you that healing doesn't always come the way we expect, but it always comes when love leads the way. On an ordinary Saturday morning, Andrew James came home early. What he walked into felt anything but ordinary. The flour was still falling. You could see it, drifting through the air like fine snow, turning sunlight into gold dust as it floated past the kitchen windows. There was a stillness to it, a strange, holy kind of quiet that sat heavy in the room, even as his son laughed. Andrew stood at the doorway like a man who'd forgotten how to move. His eyes were fixed on Alex, 5 years old, lying on the hardwood floor, arms wide, legs sweeping softly through the flour like he was back in winter, smiling, laughing. It was a sound Andrew hadn't heard in what felt like forever, a sound he'd almost convinced himself he'd never hear again. The boy had gone silent the day Emma walked out. Not a tantrum, not a scream, just still, a small child frozen by grief. And now here he was, giggling, rolling, covered in flour, cheeks red with joy. And beside him, Elizabeth Brown, the new housekeeper, hired just 2 weeks earlier through a high-end agency. Andrew had barely spoken to her since. She wasn't intrusive, didn't ask questions. She just came and went, cleaning quietly, like a ghost. But now, she was in the middle of his kitchen, kneeling barefoot in a pile of flour, arms open, laughing with his son. She didn't look guilty, didn't flinch when she saw him, just smiled, soft, calm, present. It made no sense. Andrew's instinct was to snap, to ask what she thought she was doing, to demand answers, but his voice didn't work. Not when Alex looked up at him, eyes shining, and said it again. Again. One word. Clear. Soft. Alive. Andrew swallowed. The lump in his throat was sudden, heavy. He couldn't take his eyes off the boy. He looked down. The floor that was usually polished to perfection was a mess, flour spilled across every plank, thick enough to leave footprints and patterns. Alex had drawn something, 2 wings, side by side, one small, one barely formed. Snow angels. In flour. Andrew blinked. The moment felt too big to fit inside his chest. He finally spoke quiet, low. "What is this?" Elizabeth didn't answer right away. She brushed flour from her arm, then looked at him gently, like she already knew how fragile this moment was. "It's called sensory mapping," she said. Alex reached for the flour himself. "That's the first time he's touched the floor since she left." Her voice was soft, even, not defensive, not emotional, just truth. Andrew stared at her. He didn't know what to say to that. Didn't even know how to process it. The kitchen, his kitchen, where nothing was ever out of place, was now covered in chaos. But his son was alive in it, present in it. And Elizabeth? She wasn't standing above him. She was with him, on the floor, laughing, waiting. Andrew stepped forward, slow, careful. His shoes crunched softly on the flour. He looked down and saw the edge of his son's angel shape, just touching the toe of his shoe. Alex smiled, a real, full smile. Then, with complete trust, he reached up and handed his father a wooden spoon. Andrew stared at it, confused. Then at Elizabeth. She met his eyes. "He wanted you to stir," she said simply. Andrew held the spoon in his hand. It was warm from Alex's grip. He didn't kneel. Not yet. But something in him bent, just a little. A pause stretched between them. Flour floated past his collar. The boy giggled again, brushing flour from his face. It left a handprint on his cheek. And that's when Andrew noticed the notebook. A small spiral-bound thing resting on the countertop, open, filled with handwriting. Dates, moods, observations. He recognized Alex's name, scribbled again and again. She'd been watching him. Not like a maid, like something else entirely. Andrew's throat tightened. He glanced at Elizabeth. She didn't explain. She just sat there beside his son, waiting. Not pushing, not performing, just holding space. And somehow, in the middle of that mess, Andrew didn't feel out of control. He felt something he hadn't in a long time. Stillness. And for the first time since the divorce, he didn't want to run. He just stood there, watching his son smile, covered in flour, covered in grace. And though he didn't kneel that morning, a part of him never stood the same again. Because something sacred had started. And it wasn't over. Not even close. She never explained herself that morning. She didn't need to. While Andrew stood frozen at the edge of the flour, still holding the wooden spoon in his hand like it was a relic, Elizabeth simply smiled and let the moment pass like it belonged to someone else. That was the first thing he noticed about her. She never tried to take credit for anything. Not the laughter, not the word, not even the peace. She moved through the kitchen that day with a kind of reverence, wiping down the counter without rushing, helping Alex to his feet without startling him, dusting flour from the boy's curls with a tenderness that felt too personal for a woman he barely knew. It made Andrew uneasy, not because she did anything wrong, but because she did everything right, and he didn't know how to handle that. She'd arrived 3 weeks earlier, recommended by the agency, no family listed, no references needed, just a clean background check, glowing reviews, and a soft-spoken voice over the phone that said she was available for live-in work. Andrew hadn't asked for much. He didn't want connection. He wanted structure. Someone to keep the place clean, to make meals, to stay out of the way. When she moved in, she came with just one suitcase and a single spiral-bound notebook tucked under her arm. She spoke very little those first few days, never interrupted, never lingered. She found her rhythm quietly making herself small in a house built to be loud. Alex didn't speak to her. Not once, but she watched, patiently, from the edge of every room. She noticed how he avoided the floor, how he only ate dry cereal with his hands, how he covered his ears when the blender started. Every evening, after the kitchen was spotless, she would sit at the far end of the dining table, open that little notebook, and write. No one asked her to. No one told her to. But every page began the same way. Date, time, mood, triggers, response. She was tracking him, not like a maid, like someone searching for something. The first change came on a Wednesday. Quiet, easy to miss. Andrew remembered walking past the living room and seeing Elizabeth seated on the rug, a baking video playing softly on her phone. She wasn't even looking at it, just letting the sound drift through the room. The video showed a child's hands kneading dough. Soft music, gentle voiceover, laughter in the background. Alex, who had been curled up on the armchair with a blanket over his legs, turned his head slowly and stared. He didn't move, didn't speak, but he watched until the video ended. Elizabeth didn't say anything. She simply reached for her notebook that night, flipped to a fresh page, and wrote. By Friday, she started baking in the mornings. Nothing loud, just cinnamon rolls, mostly. Soft dough, no mixer, everything by hand. She always left the kitchen door open. Never called Alex over. Never said a word. But the scent filled the penthouse warm sugar, vanilla, something that felt like memory. On the third morning, Alex walked to the kitchen threshold on his own. Watched her knead the dough. Didn't step inside. Elizabeth didn't look up. But she set a small bowl of flour on the floor near the doorway, just within reach, and kept working. When she glanced back 10 minutes later, 2 small fingerprints were pressed into the powder. She wrote it down that night. Date, time, mood, response. He touched the flour. Andrew never noticed any of it. He was too buried in meetings, too detached to look closely, too tired to care. But now, standing in that kitchen days later, his son covered in flour, the silence finally broken, he saw it. Not just the mess, but the method. She had been building to this. One tiny step at a time, with no applause, no attention, just faith and patience, and something else Andrew didn't recognize in people anymore. Compassion without motive. Later that afternoon, while Alex napped on the couch, Andrew wandered into the hallway where the linen closet sat open. A broom leaned gently against the wall. A dustpan, half filled with flour, rested nearby. On the top shelf, just behind a stack of folded towels, he noticed a worn photo album. He pulled it down. The first page held a picture of Alex at 2 years old, standing on a stool beside his mother, hands deep in cookie dough. Flour on their faces. Laughter frozen in time. Andrew stared at it for a long time. His hands trembled. Then he turned the page and saw a note tucked behind a recipe card. In Emma's handwriting. He likes to feel things, soft textures, safe ones. He closed the book, and for the first time since she left, he whispered her name out loud. Emma. He didn't know why Elizabeth had chosen flour, but now he was starting to understand. She wasn't just cleaning the house. She was reading its ghosts, and gently, without force, she was helping them speak. The next Saturday, Andrew stayed home on purpose. He didn't say it out loud, didn't cancel meetings, just didn't schedule any. He told himself it was nothing. But at 6:59 a.m., he was already awake, standing in the hallway outside the kitchen, waiting. The flour was already out. He could see it through the doorway, 2 brown paper bags, half opened, sitting on the island. A soft hum filled the room, some kind of instrumental music playing low from a speaker near the sink. It wasn't the kind of music Andrew usually noticed, but this morning it felt like the room had a heartbeat. Elizabeth was there, kneeling on the floor in a blue apron, sleeves rolled up. Her hands moved in slow, practiced rhythms as she poured a small stream of flour into a shallow metal bowl. Across from her, Alex sat cross-legged on a towel, eyes wide, waiting. He wasn't smiling yet, but he wasn't afraid either. Andrew stepped in. Slowly, quietly. No one said anything. Elizabeth glanced at him just once, then turned back to Alex. She dipped her fingers into the flour and tapped it lightly, sending up a small puff of white. Alex giggled. Not the wild laughter from before, just a soft, quiet sound. But it was real. She handed him a wooden spoon. He took it, and without needing to be told, he began to stir the flour, small circles at first, then larger. Andrew leaned against the doorway, watching. There was no performance, no forced smiles, just presence. He couldn't remember the last time the room felt like that. 10 minutes passed, maybe more. Then Elizabeth looked up at him, not pushing, not inviting, just meeting his eyes. She held out another spoon, not toward Alex, toward him. Andrew hesitated. He'd spent his whole life in control. Boardrooms, deadlines, quiet penthouses and locked offices. He didn't kneel for anyone. But his son was watching. And for some reason, today, that mattered more than pride. So he walked forward, and slowly, stiffly, knelt down on the other side of the flower bowl. The hardwood floor creaked under his knees. The spoon felt awkward in his grip. Too small, too simple. He looked at Elizabeth. She didn't speak. She just pressed her palm flat into the flower, leaving a handprint. Then looked at Alex. Alex watched her. Then copied her motion, pressing his tiny hand into the powder. And then he looked at Andrew. And waited. Andrew swallowed. Then reached forward, pressed his hand into the flower. It left a ghost-like imprint. Uneven, faint at the edges. But it was there. Right next to his son's. Elizabeth didn't say a word. She just nodded once, and said quietly, "He sees you now." For a moment, no one moved. The music kept playing. The sun crept across the marble. The flower caught the light. Alex leaned forward and placed his hand on top of Andrew's print. His fingers were smaller, barely reaching the edges. But he matched the shape. And then he looked up. "Daddy," he whispered. Andrew felt his breath catch. He hadn't heard that word, not like that, not with joy, in months. His hands dropped to his lap. His eyes burned. He turned away, just slightly, hiding the crack in his voice. "I'm here," he said softly. It was all he could manage. Later that morning, after Alex had fallen asleep in the blanket, Fort Elizabeth had helped him build behind the couch, Andrew stayed behind in the kitchen. Elizabeth was wiping down the counter. The music had stopped. The room felt still. He looked over at her. "Why flower?" he asked. His voice wasn't sharp anymore. It sounded tired, but open. Elizabeth paused, still facing the sink. "Because it's safe," she said. "No smell, no noise. It doesn't stick, it doesn't sting. It moves when you move it. It follows the child's lead." She turned to him. "And because it leaves a mark, but not a scar." Andrew stared at the countertop, covered in soft white dust. He nodded, then asked, "Have you done this before?" She didn't answer right away. But after a long pause, she said, "Not like this." Andrew didn't say anything else. But he stayed in that kitchen long after she left, tracing his finger through the flower, following the shape of a handprint that wasn't his, because something inside him had moved, just slightly, but enough to feel it. The stone had cracked, and now he couldn't ignore the light coming through. The flower stayed on the floor. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to leave footprints in the hall. Enough to cling to Alex's socks hours later. Enough to remind Andrew every time he walked into the kitchen that something was changing, and he didn't know how to stop it. That night, he didn't sleep much. He tried. He laid down in his bedroom alone, as always, the city outside buzzing faintly through thick windows, but the silence inside felt louder than ever. He kept seeing that little handprint, pressed beside his own, almost touching, and hearing the boy's voice, just one word, "Daddy." It echoed differently now, not just in memory, but in guilt, because for all the joy he'd felt in that kitchen, all the pride, there was something else, too, something heavier. He hadn't been there. Not really. Not for the silence. Not for the tears. Not for the quiet slipping away of a boy too young to know how to grieve. And now Elizabeth, this stranger, had found a way in. She'd done something he couldn't. And as grateful as he was, a part of him resented that. The next day, Elizabeth baked again. This time it was cinnamon bread. The smell wrapped around the apartment like a memory he hadn't asked for. Andrew stood in the hallway, hands in his pockets, watching her move. She worked with purpose, quiet precision. No humming, no speaking. just the rhythm of someone who knew what they were doing and did it with care. Alex wasn't in the room. He was in the den, watching cartoons, half curled under a blanket. Elizabeth glanced at the hallway once, saw Andrew, but didn't greet him. She just kept kneading the dough, and maybe it was the scent, or the silence, or just something unnameable, rising in his chest. But Andrew stepped into the kitchen. "Do you always use cinnamon?" he asked, softly. Elizabeth didn't look up. "Only on Sundays," she said. He nodded, then added, "Emma used to, when she baked." Elizabeth paused. Not a dramatic stop, just a quiet slowing of her hands. Andrew leaned against the counter, fingers curling around the edge. "I haven't opened the spice rack since she left," he said. Elizabeth still didn't speak, but her hands moved more gently now. "She had a recipe book," he went on, "used to keep it tucked behind the olive oil. I think it's still there." Elizabeth finally glanced up. Her eyes met his for half a second. Soft, steady, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not comfort, just recognition. Two people standing in the remains of a life neither of them built, but both were now living in. Later that afternoon, while reorganizing the spice shelf, Elizabeth found it. The notebook. Beige cover, handwritten label on the front. Emma's kitchen. She didn't open it right away. She just sat with it for a moment, ran her fingers along the edge. When she finally did, a small folded photo slipped out. Alex, barely 3, standing on a stool beside Emma, his hands in a bowl of flour, his face lit up, smiling wide. Elizabeth turned the page. Inside were more than recipes. There were notes, tiny scribbled thoughts in the margins, observations, reminders, reflections only a mother would write. "Alex hates loud sounds, skip the mixer. Let him crack the eggs, even if he makes a mess. Cinnamon calms him down. Always say thank you after he stirs. He needs to feel helpful." Page after page. Not just instructions, but love, written in flour and ink. Elizabeth closed the book. She didn't cry, but she didn't move for a while either. That Saturday, she baked one of Emma's cookie recipes. No explanation, no announcement. Just set out the ingredients before Alex woke up. Let the scent fill the space again. Soft vanilla, warm sugar, and that quiet, steady cinnamon. Andrew didn't ask questions. He walked into the kitchen as she pulled the tray from the oven, then stepped back into the doorway like he hadn't seen anything at all. Alex came in on his own, sleepy-eyed, barefoot, still in dinosaur pajamas. He sniffed the air, then stopped, like something had just clicked. He looked at the tray, then up at Elizabeth, and whispered, "Mummy cookies?" Andrew froze. He hadn't heard that word spoken in weeks. Not in that voice. Not without pain. He turned his head slightly, just enough to hide his face. His hands trembled against the wall. Elizabeth didn't answer. She didn't need to. She simply placed the tray on the counter and quietly stepped away. Andrew stood there for a long time, watching his son eat quietly, crumbs on his cheeks, eyes soft. The moment didn't belong to him. Not fully. Not yet. And that truth stung more than he expected, because sometimes healing comes wrapped in someone else's hands. It was a Tuesday when she showed up. No call. No warning. Just a knock on the door, sharp and clipped, followed by the hum of elevator doors closing behind her. Andrew opened it, half expecting a delivery. Instead, he found her Sarah Klein. Corporate suit, leather portfolio, thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was in the area," she said, stepping in without waiting for permission. "Thought I'd stop by. The agency likes updates." Andrew didn't move at first. Then he stepped aside. The air in the apartment shifted the moment she walked in. It always did with people like her, people who spoke in contracts, who wore approval like armor, who looked at children like liabilities. She stood in the kitchen, perfectly still, eyes scanning the space. There was no flour on the floor that day. Elizabeth had cleaned earlier. But even clean, the kitchen still felt different, like it remembered something warm. Sarah didn't sit. She clicked her pen. "So," she said, not looking up, "how is the housekeeper working out?" Andrew paused. The question was simple, but it didn't feel simple. He glanced toward the hallway, where Alex was humming softly from the other room. "She's—" He hesitated. Sarah looked at him now. "Yes?" Andrew's jaw tightened. "She's doing more than expected." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Is that a good thing?" He looked at her for a moment, really, looked. "Yeah," he said, "it is." She scribbled something on a form, then closed the folder. "I'll need to speak with her directly." Andrew started to protest, but before he could say a word, Elizabeth stepped in from the hallway. She had heard. She wasn't wearing her apron today. Just a grey sweater and jeans, her hair loosely tied back. She looked ordinary, which somehow made her presence even more grounded. "I'm available," she said calmly. Sarah nodded. "Let's speak here." She pulled out a chair. "Saturday." Elizabeth didn't. She stood across the counter, hands folded gently in front of her. No fear. No resistance. Just readiness. Sarah got straight to it. "Your duties here were listed as cleaning, light cooking, and general childcare support. That's correct?" "Yes," Elizabeth replied. "And yet we've received notes suggesting you've taken on roles beyond that." Elizabeth didn't flinch. "Such as therapeutic engagement, unsupervised sensory activities, emotional intervention." Elizabeth nodded once. "I haven't used labels. I've followed his needs." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "You're not a licensed therapist, Miss Brown." "No," Elizabeth said. "I'm not." Andrew stepped in now, voice firm. "But she's the first person who's reached him. That should count for something." Sarah didn't turn to him. She kept her eyes on Elizabeth. "And what exactly are your methods?" Elizabeth didn't blink. She walked over to the drawer beside the fridge, pulled out her small spiral notebook, and placed it on the counter. "Every session is documented. Nothing is improvised. I observe, I adapt, I record responses. All sensory-based, no language pressure, no contact without consent." Sarah flipped through a few pages, unimpressed. "This isn't clinical." "No," Elizabeth replied. "It's human." A long silence followed. Sarah closed the notebook, tapped it once with her pen. "And what if the boy gets attached? What happens then?" Elizabeth's voice didn't rise, but something in her eyes turned unshakably steady. "Then he learns that safe people stay longer than the ones who leave." Andrew said nothing. He didn't have to, because for the first time in weeks, he realized how tightly he was holding on to all of this. The ritual, the quiet, the hope. It was fragile, and it could all disappear with one decision. His. Sarah stood, straightened her blazer. "I'll be reporting back to the agency." She turned to Andrew. "Ultimately, this is your call. If you're comfortable with the arrangement, it stays." She glanced one last time at Elizabeth. Not kindly, not cruelly, just with indifference. Then she left. The door clicked shut behind her. Andrew exhaled. Elizabeth didn't move. She just stared down at the notebook on the counter, its pages half filled with soft pencil marks and quiet faith. He walked over, stood beside her. "She doesn't get it," he said quietly. Elizabeth shook her head. "She doesn't have to." He looked at her now not as a hired hand, not even as a helper, but as someone who had stepped into a mess and made it feel like home. "I do," he said. From that day forward, no one came to check on them again. No more questions. No more oversight. Because Andrew had made his choice. And this time, he chose the woman who stayed. It happened on a Saturday, but it wasn't like the others. There was no flower storm that morning. No snow angels. No giggling from the hallway. The kitchen was quiet. Not cold, not tense. Just still. Andrew had noticed the change the night before. Alex had gone to bed early. No protest. No bedtime story. No whispered, "Daddy," like the week before. Just silence. The kind that pressed at the walls. Elizabeth moved softly through the kitchen, preparing the usual. A bowl of flour, a wooden spoon, a folded towel near the window where the sun always came in first. But Alex didn't come. She didn't call for him. She never did. She simply waited, kneeling quietly by the bowl, watching the doorway like it might open any second. It didn't. Andrew sat in the dining room, just around the corner, listening. He felt it in his chest, something tightening, like the quiet was alive, like it was circling the house again. He stood and walked toward the kitchen, but before he reached the doorway, Elizabeth spoke, still facing the floor, still kneeling. He didn't sleep well. Andrew stopped. What happened? She shook her head slightly. He had a dream, I think. Didn't say much. But when I checked on him, he was curled up in the corner of the bed, like he was making himself small. Andrew exhaled slowly. Did he say anything at all? Elizabeth turned to look at him now, her voice low, controlled. He asked if flower angels disappear when we stop making them. Andrew didn't respond. Couldn't. An hour passed. Still no sound from Alex's room. Elizabeth didn't leave the kitchen. She stayed there, kneeling by the flower, motionless, hands folded in her lap. At one point, she pressed her palm softly into the powder, then pulled it back. A print remained, only hers. She stared at it for a long time. Then, as if led by instinct, she drew a circle around the handprint. Then 3 small dots. One above, one below, one beside. She said nothing, but her shoulders lifted just slightly, like breath catching in the chest. Andrew watched from the doorway, still unsure where he fit in this ritual, still afraid to break the silence. Then came the sound. Not laughter, not footsteps, just the creak of a bedroom door down the hall. Then soft padding, bare feet on wood. Alex appeared, hair messy, pajamas twisted, eyes puffy like he hadn't really woken up. He didn't look at Andrew. He walked straight to Elizabeth. She didn't move. He looked down at the flower, at her handprint, at the 3 dots, and, without a word, he dropped to his knees beside her. Andrew held his breath. Alex stared at the marks for a moment. Then he dipped his fingers into the powder, slowly, carefully, like it might hurt. He touched the circle, then the first dot, then the second, then the third. He looked up at Elizabeth, then turned and looked at his father. The pause between them held everything. And then, a whisper. One word. Us. Time didn't stop, but it slowed. Andrew's breath caught. He stared at his son, unable to move. The boy's fingers still hovered over the flower, still pressed gently against the marks they'd made together. Us, he said again. Not loud, not asking, just saying it, like a truth that had waited too long to be spoken. Elizabeth's eyes brimmed, but she didn't speak. She reached for Alex's hand and gently placed it over her own. Andrew stepped forward. He didn't kneel. Not this time. But he came close. Close enough to feel the warmth coming off his son's skin. Close enough to see the quiet in his eyes. The kind that only comes after pain. He swallowed hard. Then whispered the only thing he could. That your family? Alex nodded. No smile. Just a nod. Steady, sure. Elizabeth looked up at Andrew. He looked back. No walls this time. No questions. Just one man standing in front of a truth too big to carry alone. He opened his mouth, and what came out wasn't an order, or a guarded thank you. It was something else. You're not just the help, he said. His voice cracked. You're part of this. Elizabeth closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, and in that silence, something settled between them. Not finished, not perfect, but real. Later that evening, the flower was still on the floor. They didn't clean it. Alex had drawn a new shape before bedtime, 3 stick figures, all holding hands. No words, just lines in powder. Andrew didn't ask what it meant. He already knew. The snow came softly that week. No warning, no storm, just the slow, steady fall of white against the windows like the world had exhaled. Andrew noticed it from his office window first. Lower Manhattan had already started to blur under the blanket. Taxis slowed, sidewalks thinned, and for once, he didn't rush to send an email or answer a call. He just watched it fall. Quiet, heavy, uninterrupted. That evening, the apartment was quieter than usual. Alex was sitting by the window with his knees tucked to his chest, watching the snow in silence. His breath fogged the glass in soft bursts. He traced circles in the condensation with one finger. Elizabeth was folding towels in the hallway. She hadn't said much since Saturday. She didn't need to. The air between all three of them held something too sacred to name. Andrew stood at the edge of the room, coat still on, gloves in hand. He looked at Alex, then at the window, then at the soft swirl of snow outside. "You want to go out?" he asked quietly. Alex didn't turn, just kept drawing his circles. Elizabeth appeared in the doorway. She didn't speak either, just waited. Andrew cleared his throat. "I thought maybe we could make a real snow angel this time, not just flour." Alex paused, then looked up. There wasn't a smile, not yet, but there was something in his eyes. Curiosity, a flicker of something old and new at once. He nodded. They walked to Central Park just before dusk. Elizabeth came too, her scarf pulled high, boots laced tight. Alex held her hand with one mittened fist, the other in Andrew's. The world outside felt different than the apartment. Colder, quieter, but in a way that made everything feel honest. The trees stood bare, the sky low, the streets quiet except for the occasional crunch of passing feet. In the middle of the park, they found a patch of untouched snow beneath a line of trees. Alex let go of their hands, stepped forward, then stopped. His boots sank slightly into the white. He looked back at Andrew, eyes uncertain, breathing shallow. Andrew stepped closer, kneeling beside him. This time, no hesitation. "It's just like the flower," he whispered. "You don't have to do it perfect, just feel it." Alex looked at the snow again, then, slowly, lowered himself down. It wasn't graceful. His arms flailed once, his coat bunched under his back, but he settled, and then he moved, arms sweeping, legs gliding, tiny breaths visible in the cold air, wings forming around him. Andrew stood frozen, watching. His chest ached, not from pride, not from joy, but from something older, something buried, regret. Because this moment, the one happening right in front of him, shouldn't have taken this long. His boy was 5, and this was the first time they'd ever done this. He felt the sting behind his eyes, sharp as the wind. Elizabeth stepped beside him, whispered, "He's safe here." Andrew nodded, barely, then crouched down, not just beside Alex, but in the snow, pressed his back into the cold, let it sting his skin, let it remind him he was alive. He looked over. Alex looked back, and for the first time, the boy reached out, placed his mittened hand on his father's chest. "Like the kitchen," he whispered. Andrew couldn't speak. He just let the snow fall on his face and closed his eyes. Later, back at the apartment, the snow clung to their coats and boots. They didn't speak much. Alex went straight to his blanket fort, crawling inside with the kind of tired that only comes after something brave. Elizabeth unpacked a small Ziploc bag. She held it up to Andrew. Inside, a scoop of snow, pressed gently against the plastic, still holding its shape. "For the kitchen," she said. Andrew stared at it, the same way he'd once looked at contracts, at bank numbers, at silver, watches and pressed suits. But now, all he saw was memory. That night, he placed the snow inside the freezer, not because it would last forever, but because he couldn't let it melt just yet. Some things you need to hold on to, even if they slip through your fingers eventually. Especially then. Saturday came again. No storm, no tension, just the quiet weight of routine. Except this time, Andrew was up first. He didn't rush. He didn't overthink it. He just moved like a man who'd already made the decision, like someone who didn't want to miss anything that mattered. The flour was already on the counter. The bowl, the spoons, the folded towel, all where Elizabeth always left them. But this morning, there was something else. 2 small packages, wrapped in brown paper, tied with thin, white ribbon. He placed them side by side on the kitchen stool and stepped back. Then he waited. Alex came in first. He was still in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes, one sock half off. He yawned, spotted the bowl, and then saw the packages. He froze. Andrew knelt. "This one's yours," he said gently, tapping the smaller parcel. Alex looked up, cautious, then reached forward, pulling the ribbon with both hands. He opened the paper slowly, piece by piece, until the cloth beneath appeared. A child-sized apron, blue, stitched with his name, Alex. His eyes lit up. Without a word, he slipped it over his head. The apron dropped past his knees, big on his small frame. But he didn't seem to care. He grinned, touched the letters, then turned, pointing to the second package. "That one's not mine," he whispered. "No," Andrew said softly. "It's for her." Elizabeth entered moments later. She paused at the doorway when she saw the 2 of them apron on, flower ready, sunlight beginning to rise across the floor. Her eyes drifted to the second parcel. Andrew nodded toward it. "I thought maybe it was time." She didn't answer, just stepped forward. She opened the package with care, slow and quiet. Inside, a white apron, soft linen, gold thread stitched into the chest. Miss Brown. She looked at it for a long time, not like she was admiring it, more like she was remembering something. Andrew spoke again. "You don't have to wear it if it feels wrong." Elizabeth looked up. "It doesn't feel wrong," she said softly. "It just feels permanent." There was a long pause. Andrew didn't fill it. He just held it with her. Then, without another word, she slipped the apron over her head, tied it behind her back. Alex clapped. A small, delighted sound. Like he'd been waiting for this. They all smiled at the same time. For the first time. The flower came next. Soft clouds in the air. Circles on the floor. Handprints pressed beside handprints. But something about this Saturday was different. Alex wasn't just playing. He was leading. He counted out loud as they stirred. 1, 2, 3. He shaped the dough into uneven hearts, pressing his small thumbs into the center of each one. Elizabeth followed his lead, molding hers to match. Andrew hesitated, hands still clean. Then Alex looked up, held out a cookie. "You have to make one too." So, Andrew took the dough, pressed it between his palms, made a heart. It wasn't pretty, wasn't symmetrical, but Alex smiled like it was the best one. He reached out and placed his cookie beside Andrew's. "Same," he said, and Andrew felt something shift inside him again. Not breaking this time, but mending. After the cookies were in the oven, the kitchen still dusted in flour, Elizabeth turned back to the counter. The notebook was there, still open, the pencil beside it. Andrew reached for it. He didn't ask, just picked it up and wrote something at the bottom of the page. When he set it down, Elizabeth glanced at the words. There was no date, no chart, no observation, just one sentence. "She gave him back to me." Elizabeth didn't speak. She didn't need to. She just ran her hand gently across the page, then closed the notebook. Her fingers rested on the cover a moment longer than they had to. Later that night, after the dishes were done and Alex had fallen asleep with flour still on his cheeks, Andrew walked into the kitchen again. The aprons hung side by side on the wall, still dusty, still warm, and beneath them, on the floor, faint but visible, were 3 overlapping footprints. He stood there, barefoot, tired, grateful. Then he whispered, to no one in particular, or maybe to God, "Let this stay." But healing is a fragile thing. It doesn't ask for attention. It grows quietly, in apron threads, in shared cookies, in words never said out loud, and in the prints we leave behind. When we think no one is watching, the flour didn't get cleaned up that week. Not all of it. Even after the cookies were gone. even after the broom had passed through twice. A faint trail of powder still curved along the baseboard. A thin dusting settled into the corners, and in one quiet spot, beneath the kitchen window, the soft outline of 2 handprints remained. Saturday came again. Not dramatic. Not different. Just right. Alex was already up when Andrew walked into the kitchen. He was kneeling on the floor, whispering a countdown under his breath. 3, 2, 1. Then he pressed his palms into the flour and swept his arms out wide. A snow angel, his own version of prayer. Elizabeth entered next. Hair pulled back, apron already on. No words, just presence. She moved through the kitchen like someone who belonged there, not as a guest, not as staff, but as someone who had stayed. Andrew didn't speak. He just stood at the doorway for a moment, watching, still in his robe, still barefoot, and for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about what was next. He wasn't thinking about meetings, or money, or outcomes. He was just here, with them. On the counter, something new rested near the flower bowl. A photo frame. Simple wood, no glass. Propped upright with a small metal arm. Inside, a printed photo. Grainy, a little off-center, but full of life. Alex and Elizabeth, both in aprons, mid-laugh. Covered in flour, faces bright, arms linked. Andrew had taken it 2 Saturdays ago. No flash, no staging, just a moment that felt too real to ignore. Elizabeth noticed it first. Her eyes drifted to it, then to him. She didn't ask who had put it there. She just looked at him like she understood what it meant. Andrew walked over slowly, bent down, and beneath the frame, he fixed a small brass plate he'd ordered earlier that week. He tightened the screws gently, hands steady, then stood back and read the words aloud, quietly. Home isn't spotless. It's where the flower stays. No one said anything, but both of them were smiling. They baked that morning like they always did now. Together. Alex led the way, counting spoonfuls, shaping dough with small, clumsy hands. Elizabeth guided gently, letting him lead. Andrew joined them, apron slightly crooked, flour in his hair. At one point, Alex drew something new in the flour. A house. 3 stick figures inside. One small, one tall, one with curls. Underneath, he wrote the word us again. Then he added a heart. Elizabeth touched it softly with her finger. Didn't speak. Didn't need to. Andrew stepped closer, watched his son's eyes. Then, quietly, knelt down. You happy? He asked. Alex nodded, then whispered something Andrew didn't expect. She makes it feel like Mummy's here, but safe. The words caught him off guard. Not because they hurt, but because they healed something. Because for the first time, Emma's memory wasn't heavy. It was held, shared, not erased, but gently folded into this new life. That night, after Alex was asleep, the kitchen still smelled of cinnamon and vanilla. Elizabeth was wiping the counter, humming something low and warm. Andrew leaned against the doorway, just watching her move. There was a softness to the silence now, the kind that didn't ask for anything. He stepped forward, held something out in his hand. A small, gold key. To the front door, he said, voice even, heart full. Elizabeth looked at it for a long time, then looked at him. I already have one, she whispered. Andrew smiled. I know, this one's not for work. That photo frame still sits beneath the kitchen window. It gets dusty sometimes. Flour settles on the edges, but no one wipes it clean. Because, in that house, mess means progress, and chaos means love was there. Every Saturday, without fail, Alex counts it down. 3, 2, 1. And Elizabeth kneels beside him. That's right, baby, she says. Let it fall. And Andrew? He watches from the doorway. Not to supervise, not to fix, but to remember. That healing doesn't always come in answers. Sometimes it comes in flour, in memory, in mess. And in the quiet kind of love, that stays,